So I'm heading off to vote now for like the 20th time on this big, ugly bill. This is the process called Vote-A-Rama, where we are essentially putting the Republicans on record by offering amendment after amendment after amendment to take different terrible pieces out of this bill. So I think the first amendment we had, Senator Ed Markey's amendment to make sure that nothing in the bill would result in the shutting down of rural hospitals. Of course, Republicans voted against that. It was followed by I think a Patty Murray amendment that would try to protect nutrition funding. They're going to essentially take hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars out of food assistance for poor families in order to fund a tax cut for super wealthy people. And there have been other amendments, for example, to make sure that we weren't borrowing money from our kids, increasing the national debt to fund this big, ugly bill. Now, as you might imagine, these amendments are failing. They're voting for all these terrible policies, but we're making them own it, and we're raising the cost on all of them politically to vote for this thing. And I think it's having an effect. We've already seen one Republican, Tom Tillis from North Carolina, announced that he's not running for re-election. Just made that announcement yesterday. He has been very outspoken, essentially calling out the fraud that is this argument by Trump and the Republicans that nothing in this bill is going to cut Medicaid because it's taking $900 billion out of Medicaid. So what does that mean in practical terms? What it means is that literally millions of people are going to lose their health care if this bill becomes law. And the thing that I find so awful is that on top of all of these terrible cuts and the great harms they're doing, you've got to go this way, we still are going to have to raise the debt. We're going to have to borrow from our kids and grandkids in order to fund this big, ugly bill. So even with all their devastating cuts to Medicaid, even with all their attacks on food for young families, it's still not enough, because they want the kind of tax cuts that will mean if you're making more than $5 million a year, your tax cut is going to be $346,000. $346,000. Every year, that's going to be your tax cut if you're that wealthy. Now, if you're a poor family, you're going to pay more in taxes. How is that right? How is that fair? You know, I think about my dad was part of the greatest generation, what they sacrificed so that we could enjoy a better quality of life. And what are we seeing now? Instead of any kind of shared sacrifice, if that was the greatest generation, this is the most selfish, because they're essentially taking money from future generations in order to fund this big, ugly thing. So here we are. One more vote. Probably we'll be here all night long voting against this thing. Right now, it's being delayed because the Republicans don't have an agreement among themselves. So we're already voting on amendments to a bill, and we don't even know what the text of the bill is. But it just shows you that even in the dark of night, even after days of them trying to get their act together, they can't, because they know how deeply wrong, deeply unpopular this bill is. Well, gotta go vote on another one.